Hello and welcome to Watkins Wise Words, a podcast that celebrates conscious, passionate, wise and happy living. Thank you for tuning in, and here is your host.
So, hello and welcome. My name's Steve Nobel, and today I'm speaking with Tom Fortis-Mayer and Nick Seneca-Jankel on belief, faith or spirituality. So Tom is a Harley Street hypnotherapist, author, international speaker and creator of the Free Mind Pillar Approach to Happiness. Tom is the author of the Free Mind Experience, which explains how to bring more peace, power and purpose into your life. And Nick is a wisdom teacher, breakthrough coach, innovation and leadership expert who works at the cutting edge of personal, social and organisational change. He's the author of Switch On, Unleash Your Creativity and Thrive with the New Science and Spirit of Breakthrough. So hi guys, welcome to you both.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi.
So here we are now, we have a cunning plan around speaking about these issues of belief, faith and spirituality. So Nick, now I want to kick off with you because I read an article that you wrote and this is what you said a bit of it. I quite liked it. I believe it's because being openly spiritual is the last great social taboo. You're sitting in a meeting or down the pub, you slip up and mention the S word. As you do, you catch that look in people's eyes. You've been condemned as an intellectual heretic or nice but dumb hippie. So do you think that that's changing, or do we still have some way to go, Nick, on this whole spiritual word thing?
It's definitely changing. I wouldn't have written the article until it had changed enough for me to write it.
Yeah. Cool.
And there's definitely a mainstreaming of an interest in what you might call the transcendent in British culture, and also around the world. I think it's still early days. I think the US is very different. So the US, there seems to be much more openness to any form of faith, spirituality, religion as a normal thing to talk about at a meeting.
Yeah.
In the UK, because of our very rationalist and atheistic society, there's lots of religion within it, but sort of the way organizations are run and the way things occur, it doesn't, religion doesn't really come into it. And the same in France. I think it's got some ways to go, but there's definitely a renaissance of interest in these topics. Definitely.
Right. So Tom, talking on that note of a renaissance of spirituality, do you think there is a positive role for spirituality, belief and faith in our modern world?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think just helping people understand, their relationship to their reality, people, I think it's easy to look at the world and think that people are becoming more open to these things, and I think there's evidence to support that. But I also think there's evidence to support that people are more materialistic than ever, and looking for happiness in all the wrong places more than ever. But I also think there's a weird kind of flavour of mainstreaming where there's a lot of young people that are totally into yoga and mindfulness, but not... then they wouldn't consider themselves into spirituality, and aren't especially interested in personal development, but they're interested in the kind of the life hack benefits of taking time to, do yoga, be fit and be mindful. Yeah. And so there is some real mainstreaming of spiritual principle.
And the starter drugs.
What? Gateway drugs.
Gateway drugs.
Gateway drugs, yes. Do you think that's a good thing, Tom, that people can enter kind of yoga with the spirituality stripped out, or mindfulness with it all stripped out as a way in? Do you think that's a good thing?
I do. I think actually, and I'm passionate about running events where people get to experience the benefits of a spiritual perspective in a kind of laboratory condition. It's an event, it's a celebration event, or it's a party, and then you play with some of those themes and people are like, oh wow, I haven't had a drink and yet I'm feeling really happy. Why am I feeling happy? And it's like, well, because actually using some guided processes, you've experienced life from a more enlightened perspective for 3 hours and it feels good.
Do you think there's a safety aspect to it, that people need to go in step by step, rather than jump all the way in, like a bit of mindfulness might be an easy way to start?
I think there is that, but I also think that in many ways people's ego structure intuitively know that if they get into that stuff, it's going to create change that they're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
And that's sensible. most people begin on the spiritual journey for the hope of kind of spiritual benefit. More peace, more power, and actually truly becoming conscious. It doesn't increase the peace in your life, probably for quite a while. And I would say it adds complexity and complication in a way which is more intense than not becoming conscious and awake and aware.
Yeah, great. So, Nick, back to you. When I was working at Alternatives, I remember some years ago the Bishop of London, way back, criticised the kind of new spiritual scene, saying something along these lines that it kind of resembled a supermarket where there's far too much choice, and that was a bad thing. I mean, do you think that with all this, yes, I mean, as we mentioned, there's a materialistic kind of void, but do you think that too much spiritual choice is a problem?
I don't think it's necessarily a problem in and of itself. The challenge that I think people are faced with is that if you cherry pick the bits you like, which is what I have done over the last 20 odd years, right? I cherry pick the bits I liked. Yeah. There's a danger that if you don't engage with a system in its entirety, whether it's Sufism or Kabbalah or Christian mysticism or whatever, then you can essentially miss out the inconvenient bits. Yes. Which is kind of, pointing to what Tom was saying, that your defensive protective structures are quite happy to guide you to pick out the juicy bits that are fun and sexy and cool, and miss out like the really intense shadow work, the healing of your primary traumas and wounds, the taking responsibility for your full self as a creator of your reality, and including all the stuff that you don't like in it. And so at some point on a true spiritual journey, a seeker's journey of completion, you will have to and categorically must engage in that stuff. And if you're like at the buffet and the spiritual buffet, you're like, oh, I have a bit of this tight butt yoga, it's really nice. I have a bit of this ecstatic dance because it feels really good. Yeah. And I have a bit of this stuff over here. And then I can quite happily bypass and hack all the actual deep, dark night of the soul work, which I see a lot of people doing, like a lot. In fact, probably the majority of people I know who are, I would say, into contemporary spirituality, I don't necessarily think are fully engaged with the ugliness of their shadow and what it can and often does create in their reality.
Yeah, it's a bit like, there's old Fintorn angel cards where you say pick one and somebody picks out obedience at the traffic lights. And they say, I don't like that, I'm putting it back.
Right.
It's a bit like that.
Right.
And what you're kind of talking about is being held to account, isn't it? Because I think any path, would hold you to something like being responsible, holding up a kind of mirror. And of course, if you're in charge of all the mirrors and you go, no, I don't like that one, put that one down, then you can only go so far. That's kind of what you're saying, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So, Tom, now I've been reading an article that you wrote, and I think you wrote something on faith, and you wrote, I think it was on the Watkins website, I believe, many people mistake faith as being a personal blessing, whereby we as a separate individual will have some kind of golden protection and endless bliss. Life remains full of challenge, complexity and complication. Great talents go unrecognised. Good people will still die young. The material realm is always contained within the parameters of growth and entropy, and therefore will always be unsatisfactory, insubstantial, impermanent, but we are less focused on the small, limited and fearful personality and more identified with our large, unlimited, loving universality. We are able then to see the bigger picture. So can you just say something about that? Is faith a matter of trusting something bigger than our small, fearful selves? Is that what faith is?
Yeah, I think in summary, that's exactly what it is. It's recognizing that our personal hopes and wishes aren't necessarily the concern or interest of the collective whole. If we can be more identified with the collective whole, then it's much easier to be able to understand the unfolding of reality. And the wider we can hold that perspective, the more easy it is to see the perfection in all things. And that's, because our personal reality is very attached to things being good or bad, right or wrong. And yet when we can start looking from a wider perspective, from our universality as opposed to our personality, then actually there's a perfection which becomes really clear. And the idea of one thing being better than another just starts to be preposterous. It's what they talk about in the spiritual texts as being the dissolving of duality. It's no longer differentiating your experience and imagining that one thing is somehow better than another. It's being able to relax into the flow of the unfoldment. But what is interesting, at the point at which we're able to do that, then we are actually operating with the kind of vibration and the kind of attitude and the kind of philosophy that means we are much more likely to be protected. So that at the point at which we don't need protection is the point at which we are more likely to be blessed.
Great. Let me ask you about that collective whole that you mentioned, because a Daily Mail reader might think they were connected to the collective whole, by reading. I'm being facetious a bit here.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
What would you say about that collective whole? How is it? Just I guess the labels don't matter, but what would you kind of say about that? What is it?
I mean, for me, my understanding, I guess if I wanted to label my beliefs, I'm a pantheist. I'm a believer in all things being an expression of the divine, which is great because, Steve, that makes you a god, which is, I think, easy to see, but don't get too excited because that means so's the carpet, so's the tarmac, so all the things that are included within our experience, and for me, the most free person, whether you call that enlightened or happy, or is someone who can experience the present moment without resistance, trusting that all is as it should be. And for me, if you're 100% yes to that, then that's freedom, and we're in flow with what is occurring. And when we're in that place, then usually extraordinary things can happen, things that we wouldn't have usually designed or planned, or if we had a plan, would have blocked that. And so for me, what I've come to understand is, but I can't be 100% at peace with the moment as it is, unless I'm 100% at peace with who I am, because I'm an intrinsic part of it. I don't need the trees to be slightly greener. I don't need the stars to be slightly to the left. I am also part of that divine unfolding. I am the right person in the right shape at the right time with the right experiences and the right paradoxical feelings and fears and all of that stuff, to be part of what is being asked for in that divine moment. And for me, the kind of third element of that is, in order for me to really feel that way about myself in the present, means I must feel that way about every single thing that I've experienced, because they're an intrinsic part of what makes me, me. And that level of kind of freedom, that level of faith, for me, is a trusting in the unfolding process. And it isn't personal. It's, if you're thinking of it in terms of my name is Tom and this is my body, then no, my life, lots about that would be, you could see as being complicated and maybe not easy or good. But it's when we can hold that perspective of, for me, almost getting subatomic. I'm the atoms that are making up my body are 13.7 billion years old. They've been in many forms before. They're going to be in many forms again. Everything's just a moving around of the atomic structure, the singular, light field. Then my personal hopes and wishes become less relevant. And the analogy I like to use for this is this idea, and it's talked about in lots of the spiritual texts. It's mentioned directly in the Tao Te Ching. The sage won't be gored by the rhinoceros or attacked by the tiger. And this theme turns up in Hinduistic texts and also in modern media, where there's the kind of Native American sitting surrounded by rattlesnakes that aren't biting him, or Mel Gibson can look at a dog in Lethal Weapon and put out his two kind of fingers and control it with his mind. And there's this kind of ideology that if we can be really Zen-like, that animals won't attack us. But for me, our relationship with faith or fear, if we're in faith, then we're not in fear. If we're in fear, we're more likely to be in resistance, be in resentment, not at peace in the moment. And so this idea, I got kind of captured by this idea that if, according to principles of oneness, if I can be as identified with the singular field as I am myself. So I'm walking around, I'm as much the trees and the carpet and the walls and indeed all of the animals as I am myself. I'm all things expressed at all times. Then if I was in a jungle and a lion happened upon me and it decided to eat me, if I was totally free, then I could be as content being eaten by the lion as anything, because I would imagine myself as much the lion as myself. So I would be at the same time having a good lunch.
Okay.
Now that's a stretch.
Yeah, it's a stretch.
It's a stretch.
Yeah,
but,
it's a stretch.
But the thing that's interesting, and this is the bit that I try and captures my interest, was if we were able to be that relaxed when we saw the lion would not see us as food. And it's that level of faith, it's that level of fearlessness which creates a field of protection. And you don't need to go into a jungle and take your chances with lions as your meditative practice. You can see this playing out in playgrounds with kids at school. You know, we're programmed to attack that which is afraid, and we're programmed to support and bless that which is in faith.
Brilliant. Well, I just want to ask Nick. Nick, do you have anything to say on, is faith a matter of trusting something bigger than our small, fearful selves? What would you say to that?
Well, I actually don't really like or use the word faith.
Yeah.
To me, I think faith is a word that's steeped in religion and ideology. It's steeped in magical thinking. It has within it a sense of a personal God that does things for us and for me. So I think trust is a bigger word, but there's some understanding from the Bible when it starts talking about faith. There's actually really talking about surrender, the being under things, and submission, surrender. So for me, faith is better translated or understood as trust or surrender, in that there's what Philip K. Dick called a vast, active, living intelligence system that is constantly at work, constantly has a set of basic sort of rules about how things work. It wants growth, it wants completeness, it wants wholeness, it wants creativity, it wants evolution, it wants complexity. And if we trust in that, and realize that is the system that we are inherently part of and are, then we can let go of feeling worried, anxious, disconnected. As Tom says, it doesn't necessarily mean it will feel any better, though it usually ends up feeling internally more relaxed, but you still might have lots of problems. But then you can start seeing those problems as actually opportunities to be part of the growth. Yeah. And that's kind of where my work has landed, which is that life is full of complexity, challenge, difficulty. If we switch on to those problems and we see them as part of this vast, active, living intelligence system becoming more of itself, becoming more complete, unfolding into more complexity and creativity, and ultimately more thriving, then we can get on that trip with it and see that within every single challenge, there's an opportunity to become more peaceful and more connected and more whole within, no matter how dark and depressing it is at first look. And a lot of my work in this area has been, what would be the word, burnished by the flame of the Holocaust, which was something that my family went through. Many people died within. And as a half Jew or three-quarter Jew, actually, I decided I couldn't teach teachings about faith, trust, surrender until I could square the circle of how does the Holocaust exist? How right now, this second, we're talking maybe 100,000 children are being abused by their parents. You know, this is the reality of this world. Yeah. And there's no point talking about faith, trust, and surrender until you really can understand why that's occurring, how that's occurring, within a universe that we like to say is love, love-based. You know, so I think trust is realizing there is a system at work And the more we trust that system ultimately wants wholeness and growth and completion. As Tom said, not necessarily always prioritizing us as individuals. It might be wholeness of our tribe, completion of our system, betterness of our society. Then we can align with that, program, get on the bus, as they used to say, and be part of the solution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very interesting. You know, I completely understand what you're saying about the Holocaust. And there's that famous author, isn't there, that was put in a concentration camp. His wife was killed. What was his name?
Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl. So for him, going through extreme darkness and facing all of that, you know, it's almost like all that we love gets stripped away. For him, it seemed like his faith or trust in life became stronger. That's quite incredible, isn't it?
Yes. I think faith and trust in life is a good statement, rather than faith and trust in God.
Yeah.
God being a personal God, a God that is trying to look out for us. This whole idea that we're going to pray for something for us, which seems to be the majority of what people think prayer is, rather than what I believe prayer is, which is how can I shift, how can I be guided so I can align with what is seeking to emerge from this active living intelligent system.
Yeah, brilliant. So, Tom, faith, as we know, the word faith, I mean, Nick did mention a little bit of it. It is a double-edged sword, isn't it? That we can see with all the conflict around the world where people are fighting around whose beliefs are right.
Yeah.
How can we really move through this kind? I mean, there's a positive side of faith, but there's also this danger of blind faith. What would you say about blind faith? Just like, it's almost like there's a kind of a challenge there that we've got to kind of be aware of and negotiate before we can get to some more positive appreciation of true faith. What would you say about that?
Yeah, because for me, within the context of this debate, you know, faith is, for me, yet another word for the trust that Nick's talking about there. Yeah, it's interesting because words, for me, it's like surrender. If it evokes for me the idea that I'm personal and there's a higher authority which is separate to me, which I must submit to. Whereas, and I know that's not what Nick was saying, but it's interesting that words, you know, evoke different ideas and different feelings. Yeah. And yet the context of your question, or the feeling I'm sensing from your question, is like, well, you know, how do we manage people with different religious beliefs? Yeah. Because the trust or the faith that I'm referring to is by definition inclusive of all things and imagining that all things are occurring in the way that they're supposed to. Yeah. So within that, yes, we're currently in a phase of that development of that singular fields awareness, where it's battling out, it's looking at different models, if you like, of how humans can find meaning and experience peace. And at the moment, large majorities of people have got a system for experiencing meaning that creates conflict. Yeah. And this is a learning field. It might be a slow learner, but I believe it is learning. In the same way that Edison had to discover successfully how not to make a light bulb, I think the universe and the field of consciousness is successfully discovering how not to have different religious beliefs at any one time on a planet.
Yeah. So, do you think it's kind of a question of, you know, like, I suppose blind faith would be someone saying, here's a book, everything in this book is absolutely true. That would be one level of faith. Or another level of faith would be learning through experience, through exploration. This is kind of what you're talking about, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. It's, you know, what one is about ascribing to a set of ideas, and then another is relaxing into the flow of your personal experience of life. Yeah. It's trusting in the unfolding life. But for me, I think where people have trouble with faith is both on the personal and the global scale. So on the global scale, we've got, well, if this universe is a loving kind of conscious field, why would there be war? And on the personal front, people's faith gets eroded because my wife was a good person and why did she die of cancer?
Yeah.
You know, and for me, you know, both the personal and the global can really get in the way of our peace and our understanding around it. And for me, an analogy that really helps me, because I went from being a very kind of busy activist and working with Nick actually to try and create social change with a lot of push and a lot of shove of energy in it, with the greatest and sweetest of intentions, but we were trying to fix the problem. And in that, actually, just my life became way more problematic. And when I lost my balance, and when I tried to reconnect to my balance, this kind of analogy surfaced in my mind, and it has made such a huge difference for me, which is a lot of teenagers, let's say a 13-year-old, a lot of 13-year-olds are self-serving, self-centered, shallow, gossipy, not especially loyal. Now, that's not all of them. There are some amazing 13-year-olds out there. But I wouldn't think that a 13-year-old that is all of those other things isn't amazing. I would think that they're 13. I was like that when I was 13. I don't think there's anything wrong I don't think there was anything wrong with me when I was 13, when I was like that. It wasn't especially pleasant, but I wasn't broken. I wasn't a broken 13-year-old. I was a young human. And I don't place myself in a superior position, but for me, human consciousness, myself included, in many ways is adolescent. There's lots about it which is possessive, shallow, materialistic, selfish, self-centered. But I'm not making that wrong. I see we're an evolving consciousness, and we're young. It's a young consciousness, and there's lots of moving towards enlightenment, and it's taking time, and there's terrible things happening in the meantime. But my faith includes that as being part of an unfolding, which I totally trust. And since I've got that, it doesn't mean I'm burying my head in the sand and I'm not caring. I still care deeply about making the world a better place, and that compulsion in me is a huge part of that. So I'm following it, but I'm not following it. I'm not pushing from a place of despair. I'm pushing from a place of trust or faith that it's all as it should be, in exactly the same way that if I was working with a client and they presented with some negative behaviors, some addiction or some violence to themselves or others, or I wouldn't point my finger in their face, tell them they were bad, and tell them they should be different. It was preposterous, right? Yeah. Actually, as a therapist, you help them understand why they feel that way and why they're behaving that way, and you help them see the unconscious motivations, and with a lot of love and a lot of care, you help them fall back in love with themselves and to forgive themselves and see that there are more beautiful ways of being that would serve them, and you encourage them with lightness and beauty to move towards that more graceful way of being. Now, if that is true of one human, then that must equally be true of a society of humans. And so it's trusting in the innate beauty and the innate greatness that is enfolding out of this. And our job, I believe, is to do that for ourselves, is to be on this journey, paying attention to working through the levels of our childishness and moving into our true kind of spiritual adulthood. And that's our purpose. And for me, when I view life as a place where that's what's being invited through me, where I have a responsibility to the collective conscious whole, to liberate myself from these limitations, and that is my purpose, and that is what will liberate the field of consciousness from that pocket of doubt and difficulty, then every day is college. Every day you're walking down the street, life is reflecting whether you're coming from faith or fear. And it's an incredible process. And as soon as you start to see that pattern, then you have to ask yourself, well, if that pattern exists, then that pattern can't be on at sometimes and off at others. It is either on or off. It is either part of the oneness or it isn't. And if you only need one experience of synchronicity where you can see an interconnected universe, and that should be it. We should always put our feet up and relax. Now, I have to remind myself constantly, and that's what a spiritual practice is. Yeah. But it can't be this glorious, interconnected, synchronistic environment at times and not at others. It's either on or off.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a brilliant response, Tom. Nick, I want to ask you something from a slightly different angle now, because I know you work as a coach. Can I ask you, as a coach, you must come up again. I mean, Tom's mentioned about his work and how it connects with this subject, but can I ask you about, as a coach, you know about the power of belief, you know about the power of the placebo effect, how it applies, not talking about medicine now. how can you use this in a positive way with clients, with other people, with people we meet, and on ourselves, really?
So let me make sure I understand what you're asking me. How do you use the natural capacity and desire for the brain to create narrative and belief out of events in a way that supports breakthrough, thriving, well-being, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, the client's own belief systems would work for them or against them, yeah.
Yes. So, the first thing to recognize is that we are all mythopoetic creatures, as in we like to create myths, dramas, narratives, scripts, explanations for everything. I like to say that nature abhors a vacuum, physics abhors a vacuum, and human beings abhor a vacuum of meaning. So as soon as we don't have any meaning with something, we create it. And that meaning can be something that brings out of us our gentleness, our compassion, our love, our curiosity, our connectivity with others, or it can bring about separation and divorce and disconnect and the pain and suffering that brings. And ultimately, no philosopher or scientist will ever be able to declare that the meaning you attribute to something is true, because it's meaning. Even on something as fundamental as the understanding that we're all part of one thing, not two or many other things. Non-duality, the sense that we are part of an interconnected whole, which is so prominent in both Tom and my work. Even that belief narrative, I can't prove it's true. I experience it as true. I believe I've had experiences which tell me it's true, as many others have, but I can't tell you it's true. I can't tell a client it's true. So therefore, you ultimately get down to a kind of, you can then cascade down to a more pragmatic question, which is which belief brings more love, truth, and creativity into your life, which narrative, and which you don't. So that's a very pragmatic question. But that's still within the realms of what I would call a more traditional cognitive behavioral psychological approach. And to add the spiritual aspect to it, so that's one question, which does this belief empower me to be a great person, a powerful person, but does it also empower me to be a loving, connected person? So the personal development world tends to stop with, does this belief help you be powerful? And what I'm more interested in is, does this belief help you be purposeful and bring love into the moment, and truth into the moment? And that's a much more spiritual question. And then there's a sort of underlying sense of which of these beliefs or stories or narratives feels in your body most true, most connected. And my work I started off very much interested in psychology and on the path of training as a psychiatrist, and studied psychoanalysis for a year. And it's all very heady based. It's mind, beliefs, words, language. It works in language. And as I've deepened my work and started working with my wife, who came at the same space through a body approach, through dance and then through craniosacral healing and therapy, I've become much more interested in the felt sense of something as an ultimate truth teller, which you might call intuition, but intuition not just as the whispering small voice of calm, but also a actual energetic flow in your body where you get a or a spark or a flash of alignment of truth ultimately. And so it's still not a truth for everyone, because your felt sense about me saying, believing that your anger is a natural response to the trauma you experienced as a child. That's a belief, right? I can't tell you that's true. I suspect and hypothesize and will suggest it to be true. But when you take it on and put it into your body as a client, do you get a kind of, recognition, a confirmation in a deep body sense that this new belief has a better fit inside you, but also a better fit with the world. So a lot of my work talks about fittedness, so not survival of the fittest, or the fit survive, the fitted thrive. So how closely do our beliefs and behaviours fit our internal truth of who we deeply are in our most noble and sort of dharmic interpretation of ourselves, but also how do my beliefs and behaviors fit the world around me? Am I walking around a sexy tech company in Silicon Roundabout using the management techniques of a 1970s hierarchy in Cincinnati? That's probably not going to work very well. Likewise, using the beliefs about dating of that 13-year-old Tom was talking about to be a 40-year-old who wants to settle down and have children, probably not going to fit very well. So belief is so powerful, but I'm not an advocate of just cognitively changing beliefs because they're more convenient, but really engaging with our entirety as a mind-body or body-mind to release beliefs that are no longer serving us, and not necessarily invent, but sort of, let's say, allow new beliefs to unfold from within, which is part imagination, part creation, but it's not a creation from nothing. It's not a creation out of just making it up. Like, oh, I'm a really, that the scene from American Beauty where she's looking in front of the mirror, she's going, "You're an amazing realtor," or whatever. I can't remember the exact thing. It's kind of, I'm going to make up a belief which my body is going, no, you're not really, you don't feel it. Which is kind of like one of the shadows of the personal development NLP space, is this sort of forcing. But actually to allow new beliefs to unfold within from the truth that we are within us, which is interconnected to everything and all things, and new beliefs or new words or new meanings can be imagined through us, dreamed through us, and bring more truth into a situation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. So, Tom, from an angle of like your work as a spiritual teacher and a hypnotherapist, what would you say about some of Nick's comments about meaning and shifting beliefs and unfolding from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I really, it really chimes with me. I agree that belief and meaning, it's all subjective. And the question is, whatever paradigm you choose to believe, whatever metaphor you choose for spirituality, whatever philosophy you choose as atheist, agnostic, or whatever, for me, and weirdly, Jesus said the same thing. It's not about the roots, it's about the fruit. It's like, how does your philosophy help you be happier and be more purposeful in terms of making this world a better place? Not by the great acts that you necessarily do, but by the sweet being that you are on a daily basis. For me, and in terms of my clients, they're coming for personal gain. And so it really is hugely, interesting to me. It's like, well, how are your beliefs and how is your operational philosophy supporting you to enjoy your experience, And the most amazing thing about some of these more modern rapid change techniques is beliefs can be changed, metaphors can be changed, and people can absorb new philosophies more quickly than ever. But you know what? But there's a lot of kind of atheistic thinking now where they do experiments to prove that people's belief is arbitrary and imaginary, and they're very quick to reduce that. And there's a classic experiment that Darren Brown did on one of his TV programs. And he met with a woman who'd agreed to be a subject in an experience. And he met with her in a cafe and said, so we've hired actors to interact with you over the next 2 weeks. And we just want you to keep a video journal. And these actors are going to be designed there to teach you lessons. Right. And then he pointed out someone that was about 50 meters away. And he said to her, "Oh, mind your feet, they might get wet," or some such thing. And then he pointed out a guy reading a paper about 20 meters away. And he stood up at that exact moment, flecked his paper, which meant someone on a bicycle swerved to miss. Then a ball was dropped by someone. And this chain reaction occurred where someone ended up spilling water where her feet had just been, which blew her mind, right? Right. So it set the scene that they were going to be orchestrating all these contrived experiences to have an impact on her. And she was very impressed, and she went away with a video camera to make a video journal. In truth, that was the last thing they contrived. And he was doing the experiment to show that people with faith, imagine that God is communicating to them when he isn't. So she did this video journal every night. She's saying, oh, that guy in the supermarket, that was a message. That was, that was Darren Brown communicating to me. And she had this whole experience. And Darren Brown used that. At the end of the 2 weeks, he said, and she'd made changes in her life. She'd decided to, I think, change her career. She decided to spend more time with her real friends and her family. She started doing more yoga and eating more healthily. It's amazing. And Darren Brown was kind of taking some joy in proving that proves that people's faith is imaginary. Now, what I found much, much, much more interesting is if you repeated that experiment with 500 people, what would the similarity be in the changes they were choosing to make? Because for me, that begins to prove actually what Nick's talking about, which there is a movement within the field of consciousness that is moving towards greater integrity, greater health, greater harmony, all of these extraordinary things. So whether the situation or the context is imaginary, there is a driving force within the center of our consciousness that is moving us towards more integrated and beautiful ways of being. And for me, it's knowing that our conscious structure and our personality system and our ego structure is a limited perceptual mechanism. And that if we can just relax into the deeper intelligence of our inner mind, which I personally believe is collected to a single kind of collective consciousness, but you don't need to believe that, to trust that your unconscious or your soul or your heart or however you might want to label it, or God, or your spirit, or your higher self, is ready and waiting to guide you to more beautiful ways of being. And for me, what's interesting is what do you need to do just to help people pay attention to the patterns?
Beautiful. Well, look, guys, it's been a great conversation. Belief, faith, or spirituality. Tom, Nick, look, thank you so much for taking part. And we could probably go on for another hour or two, don't you think?
This conversation has been happening for about more than 5,000 years. It's not going to.
So thanks, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Steve, as ever. Brilliant. And Nick, lovely to be connected with you on here again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Like what you've heard, be part of our community by visiting